Yeah, hello. I, Aaron asked me to speak today about what the agrarian renaissance reflects, about a changing view of what it is to be human, um, which is actually quite a good question to ask me. I started life as a sociologist and was sort of quite concerned always with what it is to be human and why we act the way we do, and maybe if that was changing, and maybe how that could change, and how what we should be looking to do to try and make it change. And that led me through various adventures to end up working in what's called sustainable development. And I was a consultant for a few years. I had a few frustrations working on sort of large property developments and various things that weren't sustainable. And eventually, through various ways, ended up getting involved with farming and food, which I think is probably a good way to think about how we're human and how we might be able to change it for the better. And so I've taken Aaron's question to be how I think the stuff that I've been doing over the last sort of 3 or 4 years, and it was about 3.5 years ago that I met Tim when he was starting Church Farm, and sort of how I think that kind of reflects maybe some changes that are possible and maybe already happening. So I'm going to start with a slideshow, because that's always good, to try and talk you through what I've been doing. I think that should work. Right, so yeah, I met Tim at the beginning of 2008, and Tim was born on Church Farm, but Church Farm had been set aside since 1989, when it had failed as an intensive pig farm. And Tim had done what the EU suggested, and he'd started doing clay pigeon shooting and a bit of quad bike racing, and managed to follow the dollars to the corporate headquarters and set up a nice little kind of events business, which managed to keep the farm in the family, but I don't think was really the best use of the farm or a satisfying use of the farm. And so he'd been doing a lot of reading and a lot of thinking, and he decided that he wanted to prove that mixed farming that looked after the land and that looked after rural communities and that looked after people could be viable by selling things directly and rethinking how stuff was done. And so in the last 3.5 years, it's gone from set aside and basically parkland to pretty much what you see in this kind of artist's illustration, which looks like a kind of sort of model farm like you had when you were a kid and you moved the cows and the pigs, and it's got a little bit of everything. And it's 175 acres. The majority of it is down to a pasture lay, which we have cattle and sheep on, and then the pigs then move on to that, sort of break up the ground, and after that we do arable crops and replant the lay. There's also a 6-acre veg patch, there's soft fruits being planted, there's an orchard where the chickens are, there's lots of new woodland where we keep other poultry. It's a very, very complicated farm. But it's amazingly full of life. A recent bird walk found, I think, 36 species in 2 hours. And we know for a fact that they missed out at least 8. There's there's endless wildflowers, and there's huge amounts of wildlife all around. And really, the particular thing about it is the contrast to what surrounds it. So it's in Hertfordshire, just outside London, and that is big arable land. Everything is like just, we went to a meeting at the council with other local farmers. They've all got kind of 6,000 acres that they farm with 2 people. And round the corner from us, there's one single field that's 600 acres. So it's 3 times the size of that, growing one thing. And there's pretty much nothing else living there. So the contrast is remarkable and astounding and quite scary. So yeah, I've put a few photos in, and I'll just sort of flick through them. So this is mostly to try and show the mixed nature of the landscape when you do this kind of farming. I've tried to pick photos to show that. So this is sort of a herb garden, which is in our veg patch. Then behind that you can see the field that's been broken up by the pigs. And then behind that you can see some cattle which are grazing on some fodder crops that have been planted on the land that was previously broken up by the pigs. And then there's the manure heap there that's been brought over from the cattle wintering pens, which is feeding the veg patch. So it is kind of getting back to mixed landscapes. So that's our veg patch, and so it's like trying to sort of not only have a veg patch but mix things up, like plant lots of crops next to each other. There's lots of we've got a great grower who experiments a lot with sort of companion planting and trying to get more out of space and make things work with each other. Again, it's just trying to show a mixed landscape with like lots of trees in it, and sort of we've been putting hedgerows back in, and there's so you know that we've got our sheep right behind. I think that's being bed formed for potatoes, and then in the background you can see where the pigs moved to. There's a little straw bale house in the background, which then gets used for other things, and it's then again, here's pigs with polytunnels in the background, and you can see the sheep, and you can and then here's the chickens who live in the woods, and they love that, and we love that, and it's all very great to see. And then here again, here's our soft fruit patch, which will start producing this year, which is really exciting. And then behind that, there's the orchard which has been planted. We got a few apples and plums last year, there'll be more this year. And then you can see the chicken houses all scattered in it, and it kind of goes around the middle of the village. And then I just like this photo of a grumpy cow by the orchard. And then, so there's also a huge number of people live on the farm. This is kind of right in the centre of the farm, the farmyard, and you can see those static caravans. And there's about sort of 25 people live on site. So there's a cafe, and there's a store, and we provide social care services, and we're open to the public, so we do all sorts of events and workshops, and it really is a huge number of people. So remember I said next door to us there's a 6,000 acre farm worked by 2 people, and this is a 175 acre farm worked by about 30 or 40, and it's mind-boggling. And so this is, that's the orphan lambs. I got a bit suspicious of Tim actually, because the orphan lambs, actually each one of them made more money in the first sort of few weeks of their life than they'll ever make as meat, through kind of bottle feeding for the public. So we were watching him very closely to make sure that the mothers didn't want them. And then this is actually a photo of where I live. This is a slightly nicer. There's a few more touring caravans which are hidden in the woods. I think Tim was hoping the planners wouldn't spot them, but they did, and they're now rated. And these are young people who come to learn what farming's about. We get a range of people, some who just want a bit of a break from city life and to think about something different, all the way through to people who are very serious about wanting to work on the land and start their own enterprises, their own businesses to do it. And they get food and board and 50 quid a week in return for working 6 days a week, very, very hard, and committing to at least 3 months and preferably 6 months. And that's very, very interesting, the people that come through and the popularity of it and the number of people that want to do it. And it is very intriguing. Yeah, I'm going to crack on because I could talk about this for a long time. So the first time I met Tim, I went up there actually as a sort of sustainability consultant who was meant to sort of help him with all his grand plans. I mean, he said to me the very first time that I met him that he didn't just want to be a farmer and deli owner, and that he wanted to have a go at really changing things and really shifting what was possible, proving a model, convincing other farmers that this was viable and that they should be shifting what they were doing and what they were expecting. And so that's why Aaron introduces me as a co-founder of the Agrarian Renaissance, because the Agrarian Renaissance was the name for trying to prove these kind of models, get farmers together, get people together who wanted to engage with farming and wanted proper food and felt that connection to something real was important to them. And so we had a lot of, I haven't got many photos of this because it would be photos of sort of conferences and meetings. We did have some great meetings at Church Farm with some very amazing people going through all of this. And the one side I have got is this, because this is sort of the kind of place it goes of these crazy kind of trying to figure out how all this might work, and you could kind of scale everything up and make it all fantastic. Where we got to was that there was this sort of latent thing going on where a lot of people sympathised with these kind of ideas in cities, and people liked buying the food with the nice picture on it, and they loved watching Hugh Fernley Whittingstall and River Cottage, and going on holiday on a yacht and a working farm was getting incredibly popular, and there's this sort of latent kind of groundswell of people seem to want to connect to something like that. And those are the people that you need if you want to start changing farming and the model of farming and kind of rolling out these new kind of mixed farming models, because they need customers, they need to sell direct. You need to get people involved in the farm and understanding what they're paying for, and that is true value. And basically we got as far as thinking, well, we just need those people. And so for the last couple of years, probably my attention shifted from complicated diagrams and meetings and I've been trying to get involved with things that maybe actually start to go in that direction. So one of the things was, so for the first sort of year or two of working with Tim, I was still living in London where I was born and had been living ever since, and I was going up to Church Farm sort of once a week, staying for about 2 or 3 nights and sort of doing a bit of farming and trying to help sort of develop the business and stuff. And so just before I moved up to Church Farm, I've got some friends from the city who, one's an artist and one's a sort of engineering designer, and we sort of entered some competitions and we tried to do sort of quite fun art projects about nature in the city. And so we'd all sort of wanted to do something around food, and we're thinking about kind of growing food in shops, like a vegetable shop, but actually the vegetables are actually grown in the shop. So just before I left the city, Hackney announced this amazing sort of competition where they had lots of empty shops because the credit had crunched or whatever happened, and there were all these empty spaces, and so they announced a competition called Art in Empty Spaces, and they invited the most interesting ideas for an artistic use of space for between 3 months and 12 months. And so we said, well, we've got an idea. We'll turn a shop into a farm and we'll call it Farm Shop. So that was our idea for Farm Shop. And so we won the competition, which I'm not sure if it was a blessing or a curse. It took us about 7 months to actually get the keys off the council. It's been painful in all sorts of ways, but also very amazing. And so all we had was a lease on a shop for a year without any rent, a guarantee from the council that they'd cover any kind of legal fees that appeared out of nowhere, and a guarantee that if we didn't get rates relief, they'd cover the rates. So we knew that we had no unexpected overheads apart from utilities, and they gave us a small grant of £6,000 to cover sort of everything we wanted to do. And so we kind of came up with this plan of this is the layout of the shop. So we actually got quite a big space. So we've got this really big front room that faces the road, and that's got a flat roof on it. And then we've got 3 stories and a back garden. And so the challenge was, how to farm it with absolutely kind of no money and yeah, sort of just goodwill really. And so the first thing we did was kind of turn the whole space around, clear it out, paint it. We got amazing numbers of volunteers. It was just sort of weekend after weekend of like huge teams kind of turning the space around. And then we started working, like finding partners who would help us kind of grow in interesting ways in the different spaces. And so someone helped us put chickens on the roof, and the chickens actually came from Church Farm, and that's caused a lot of interest. The chickens were actually fine. They laid the first day they got there, which none of us expected. And then carried on laying. We've got a bit of pecking going on now, but they're generally happy and okay. And then we got a polytunnel in the back garden. Someone actually managed to catch me happy, and unfortunately this photo is now all over the internet. And it's all about sort of kind of using kind of multi-purpose spaces. So Colin actually came and gave a talk in this polytunnel, because those central planters can be moved out the back door, and we move chairs in and kind of get everyone in there. And then you get inside and it all gets a bit more funky. So this is a basil wall, which is made using hydroponic equipment, which we got donated from a hydroponics company. This particular system is used to grow iceberg lettuces mostly. So if you imagine a huge, massive, long greenhouse, and those things that we've got on the wall just lying flat, just in endless rows. And hydroponics in many ways is amazing. You remove all the kind of barriers to growth, because you can just pump nutrient and air and water straight to the roots. You also lose any protection you have against pests, so it's incredibly input dependent. If you don't use all the kind of, they call it angel guard and all these strange sort of names, like our basil got root viral infections straight away and had all yellow leaves and all sorts of things. So you learn a lot of kind of stuff about what it takes. And this room's even more mad. We decided to grow tomatoes in January, mostly to show people what that took. And it takes pretty much a setup like that with a kind of 600 watt bulb and kind of reflective stuff everywhere. And it's kind of, I love the kind of weird alien thing on the right hand side. But again, that is actually exactly the system that is used to grow hydroponic tomatoes. So we hopefully sort of showing people a little bit what's behind food and what it takes. And then it's gone quite well, and so we've actually ended up managing to develop it various kind of revenue streams. We rent out desk space, we rent out a meeting room, and we started a cafe which is serving, food which includes stuff that we've grown inside the shop. And we met brilliant people like a baker around the corner who bakes in a railway arch, and someone who roasts coffee like in another direction. So it's becoming a bit of a hub for that. There's another system which I haven't got a good photo of, unfortunately, and that's called aquaponics, which is using that hydroponic technology, but with fish. So suddenly introducing a kind of ecology mindset. So the fish, you're farming the fish and they're producing ammonia, which is normally a big problem in fish farming. But you let the water get seeded with all the natural bacteria that occur in the air, and they produce nitrate. And you then grow salad and herbs with that nutrient. So you're providing the food for your plants, and the plants are cleaning the water for the fish. And you actually can't use any chemical additives in that system because you'll kill all the bacteria and you'll completely wreck the cycle. But again, it's very difficult. It's not as forgiving as soil. Nowhere near as forgiving as soil. It's very delicate balance, a lot of care and attention, but ridiculously productive. The well-known system is in the Virgin Islands, and that on 1/8 of an acre they produce 5 tons of fish and 10 tons of vegetables every year, which is insane. I mean, that is insane productivity. So that's all been a very interesting kind of detail, which I didn't expect to get that big. And also it's been quite strange sort of taking me back down to the city all the time, just as I'd managed to kind of move away from the city, which I think I'd taken quite a long time to achieve. But at the same time I've been doing stuff with Church Farm, which is trying to prove really the model of how it was conceived, because I mean the original idea was to try and feed households directly off a single farm, and Ed talked about community supported agriculture, and that's sort of the vibe behind Church Farm. If not, it's kind of a weak version of it, because the idea of a subscription model where someone just pre-buys a share of the harvest was kind of ruled out. But the idea of membership, where there are sort of identifiable households who are feeding themselves from the farm and in return have a relationship with it and kind of find out about it and know about it, that was very much always the idea. And so we've also started going into London to deliver our vegetables and our meat and our eggs and all that kind of thing. And so this is how it started out, with me kind of driving the van down into London and looking quite tired. And these people everyone would come and meet the van on the street and kind of pick up their weekly drop of vegetables, and then very similarly we run like a work day at the farm sort of once a month where they can come up, and we started running seasonal update days. And this was actually a transition group in London who were very enthusiastic and actually much more keen to get involved in the farm in ways that the people on our kind of local delivery round, who were actually quite atomised because we were just going door to door and they never met each other, and we didn't always get to talk to them, and we became sort of like a convenience drop, basically like an alternative to the Tesco's van. This actually was a completely different experience, and it was great because then we're now using this model and kind of following it much more with the kind of local area, and getting people who didn't actually realise what Church Farm could offer them actually involved in the farm and kind of doing more stuff. And then it's gone really well in London, and so we now do the drop to a cafe instead of to the roadside, which is much nicer. And then we give the cafe in return kind of seconds vegetables that we wouldn't put in a box, and so then they always have a soup on their menu that's made with our vegetables, and then there's just a photo of people who get the boxes coming back up to the farm, and this is another one of the same thing, but I think that's really positive, and that's the most positive feature for Church Farm, really. And I said it's very complicated, and it is very difficult. And getting those 200 households and getting their support and their commitment is actually the thing that can make it properly thrive and actually work. So those are the end of my slides. Because I'm meant to talk about sort of bigger things and where I think all this is going, rather than just sort of for a propaganda pitch. I've tried to write down what I think are the most sort of challenging observations I can make about everything I've been involved in. And so starting with Church Farm and everything that's been done there, I think one of the biggest things is the capacity for damage, despite the best intentions. So there's incredibly good intentions on Church Farm to farm in a wonderful way, and to use all sorts of ecological cleverness and to have a completely integrated system, like Colin talks about. But the truth is, it's all been done very quickly, and all at the same time. And you cause damage. Like, pigs are very damaging on heavy clay soil, and we don't move them enough, and so we have very, very, very damaged land. And humans get lazy, so they always want to bring silage to cattle in the same place in the field, and that place in the field gets damaged. And it's a great idea to have chickens under a mature orchard, but having chickens under a very young orchard is possibly not such a good idea, because they have much less capacity to deal with the ammonia from the chicken. So, capacity for damage despite the best intentions. Also, be careful what you wish for. We talked a lot about kind of beating the supermarkets, but then you end up matching your prices to the supermarket, and that's not so bad necessarily with the pricing, but the prices change the whole time by huge margins, and you start realising like what the effort is put into in the kind of large retail that we're trying to compete with, and actually it's not really worth kind of competing with that. And then a similar thing is, we want people to come to the farm because we want them to kind of buy the produce and get involved in it, but then maybe we go too far by just doing anything to get people there, so it's like almost kind of just promoting it as a day out, and so people come and just use it as a day out. It's one of the only free things you can do that kids enjoy in about the 20 miles around us. So people come to the farm and do not understand what it's about. People go into our farm shop, and we have to struggle week in, week out to get them to realise that all the meat is produced on our farm, let alone how it's produced. So be careful what you wish for. I've also got written down, it's the economy, stupid, which is, Bill Clinton's famous phrase. But it's true, you realise that odds are stacked against you, externalities and all the costs that have been taken out, that is just absolutely massive. And also, people as well. Like I said, it's incredibly complicated. There's like 30 or 40 people trying to, not all of them are brilliant farmers, not by a long stretch. A lot of us are novices, and I still include myself as a novice, very much. And that is one of the biggest challenges, is organising people and teaching people as well. And so moving on to the agrarian renaissance and that whole sort of trying to get things to change, that was an interesting experience. There is a food and farming movement, and if I was going to be extremely critical of that, I'd say that's got its own status quo, and that's got its own inertia, and there's a huge gap between the amount of interest I see like in the city, and so with the farm shop that's been immensely popular. Without ever issuing a press release, we've had Jamie Oliver came and filmed there, Andrew Marr came and filmed there, we've been in the Evening Standard twice. We've had 3 different offers from different Radio 4 programmes. We've been in The Guardian, we've been in The Ecologist. Like the list of media exposure is absolutely bonkers. And very interestingly, like a lot of the people we approached with our ideas about the agrarian renaissance, which I think were much better ideas than the farm shop, which I'm not sure is a model of food production. Actually, I think it makes people think, but I'm not sure how wonderful a model of food production is. But, all the people like River Cottage and Land Share and all these people, we used to approach them and say, do you want to talk about what we could do with the people you've got interested? I mean, they didn't want to talk to us, but they're suddenly doing farm shop. They are approaching us and wanting to do, and that's a very funny dynamic to experience. And yeah, but that massive gap between the natural sympathy that I think there is with the kind of things we're talking about, and getting something to happen, I think it's just huge. I think it's astounding. Farming's on telly the whole time now. It's the Victorian farm, the Edwardian farm, the river cottage. I mean, there's a lot of interest. There was one about Monty Don doing people starting their own farms. There's a huge amount of interest, and I'm not quite sure what the gap is to stuff changing. In terms of farm shop, there's a lot of challenging observations there. I don't know why everyone's so obsessed with growing all the food in cities. That is an obsession. I don't know what it is. People find it really exciting, the idea of growing food in cities, and then you say, but there was all these farms around and they could be great, and people are, I'm not interested. I don't get it. I don't understand. Yes, our most popular volunteer teams are our social media team and our events team, which puts on parties. Not our growing team, not our cooking team. Again, I don't know what that's about. I have no idea. Next thing I've got written down is hacks and quacks. So we were slogging our guts out with only £6,000 and any partnerships we could cobble together, free kit, any free wood, anything. An endless procession of journalists and consultants who were paid to come and talk about us or supposedly advise us, and that is absolutely true. And they expect you to give half a day of your unpaid time for their paid pleasure, and that is aggravating, and I don't know what that says about our society, but it says something. What's wrong with soil? I said that earlier, and I've written down Star Trek syndrome, which is, in Star Trek they used to press a button and then like any meal they imagine, like roast turkey would appear or whatever, and that to me is kind of horrific and horrible, and it's like some dream of something where things don't have to be produced, they don't have to come from anywhere, they just get magicked up, and I still sense that quite a lot with farm shop, and I think people get attracted even to that space age weird sort of hydroponic setup and all that kind of thing. And then with the kind of doing the drops into London, I think that is great actually, and I think what we're doing is quite similar to a lot of what Pete was talking about, that you can actually have very short supply chains between cities and rural areas. And it's a many to many kind of thing that you're trying to create. But then what I've got written down is exactly what you said, that I've written the daunting horror of scale up. Because we've grown that now to 3 different drop points. And between them, I think the most we've done is sort of 40 boxes between them. It's just nothing. And I'm really chuffed with it, but it just doesn't touch the surface. And also it's hard to change habits. Every time we've started 3 new drop points now, every single time we get massive interest, and I think it's usually about, between a 10th and a 20th of the number of people who say they definitely want a box actually get a box. And then over time, quite a few of them then actually change their mind, but you have to be very patient. But that's a massive thing. So those are my challenging observations. My hope is that there is something that might be called a new agrarianism that might happen. Agrarianism I take to mean just a way of life and a culture that has a lot to do with food and where it comes from, and with the land, and with the management and care of the land. I do agree also that we'll keep living in cities though, but I wonder whether we could have agrarian cities, whether there could be a lot of stuff grown in cities. In terms of what we did in the shop, I think our polytunnel setup's too small. I think you probably need a proper market garden, but there's a lot of spare land even in London. And if you start looking, that is possible, and people are starting to do that. In terms of the hydroponics, I think it's too input dependent. Some people are doing it using compost teas, which is very interesting, and that apparently makes them much more pest resistant. so I'd want to see that before I said anything about it. In terms of aquaponics, I think that's amazing. Our system requires heating because of the fish that we use, so that's really just, I can't see how you make that work, possibly with huge numbers of solar panels, but then even with renewable energy, you've got to decide what you actually want to use it for, and growing tropical fish to eat in London doesn't seem like a good idea. But nevertheless, I can imagine empty warehouses being filled with aquaponic systems. I can absolutely imagine that. I mean, actually, in Milwaukee, there's a place called Growing Power, and all of you should look at Growing Power on the internet, because there's amazing YouTube videos, and they produce $1 million worth of food on 3 acres every year, and that is amazing. So agrarian cities is one thing. I also think cosmopolitan countryside is a thing that can happen, and like a lot of people, left the countryside to go to the towns, didn't they? Because that was where the opportunity was, and that's where the excitement was. I don't think that's true anymore. I think you can have like a great life in the countryside without missing out on anything. I think like two of the things that possibly are behind those two things is, I think there's new biology and there's new understandings of ecology and even genetics that goes way beyond sort of genetic modification. Like I met Martin Wolf through Colin, and he sort of, with populations of wheat that kind of self-select to adapt to environments as they change. I mean, this is incredibly profoundly clever stuff, and people are like farming indigenous microorganisms and sort of, rejuvenating soils in incredible ways. And I think that kind of new biology, which is genuinely quite new, I think like maybe 20 years old, I think that is amazing. And the other one is just new communications. And so especially that what it means to live in the countryside, what it means for like the transfer of knowledge, and what it means for the ability to create many-to-many marketing systems. I think, and again, we all know the internet's 20 years old. It does make things different and new things potentially possible. And in terms of what it means to be human, I think there's something moving from something which is maybe anthropocentric, maybe human obsessed, maybe everything is just our resource to do with what we want, and there's maybe somewhere to go that's more ecocentric, which is about the unity of being. But I think that's maybe been a message that's been around for quite a while now. When I was studying sustainable development, we were lucky enough to have a 3-hour session with Satish Kumar, who some of you may know, founded Resurgence, is quite an amazing and profound guy. When I studied, it was in quite a corporate environment. We got put on placements into quite kind of, I think people went on placements to Tesco and Sainsbury's to make them sustainable. It was very much like that. So Satish came and he gave us a very kind of heavy thing about ecocentrism and the fundamental unity of all things. But I actually cornered him afterwards because I said this is all fine, and I completely agree with you. But what was really bugging me was that respecting that unity is about respecting the nature of all things. And what I couldn't get my head round was what the nature of humans was, and surely we needed to respect that. And what he said to me was that it's about our ability to actively engage with the rest of it, to imagine things differently, and then to play an active part in creation. And I think that is beginning to be possible. I hope that that's possible. I hope that we can, create. So that's my final word.